The story begins in the 19th century with a woman, Eugene Clary, from a wealthy French aristocratic family. She is in Paris, attending funeral of a famous French novelist, Victor Hugo, in Paris. While back home, Eugene's strict father inquires where she was, and she replies she was with her friend, while her brother Théophile smiles, realizing his sister's lying. To change the topic, he mentions a debate event taking place tomorrow. Eugene asks if she can join him, but her father says no, reminding her it's not appropriate for a lady to attend such events. After the dinner, while Eugene is holding a candle in front of a mirror, she notices something strange and feels a seizure-like experience. Her grandmother notices this, but she reacts calmly. Later, Eugene is seen gently combing her grandmother's hair before saying her good night. On her way back to her room, Eugene hears whispers from the hallway and notices Théophile making out with another man. She candidly smiles and retreats to her room. Next morning, when Théophile gets ready for the debate, he is surprised to see Eugene in his wagon, even though their father strictly forbade her. Eugene explains that she isn't interested in attending the debate. Instead, she wants to be dropped off at a cafe on his way. Théophile agrees and the siblings set off. At the cafe, Eugene sits across from a man, reading a book about spirits. As they exchange glances, the man introduces himself and immediately starts flirting. Eugene initially feels awkward, but gradually becomes comfortable due to his sense of humor. She tells him that she wasn't looking at him, but rather at the book he was reading. The man lends her the book to return it once she's finished reading it. Eugene starts reading the book same night and is captivated by it. The book explores into the spirit world, its purpose, and human-spirit interactions. Next day, their family joins another wealthy family for an outing. The parents hope the other family's daughter will catch Théophile's attention. Even though Théophile have no interest in females, he pretends to be interested in the girl to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, noticing her brother's discomfort, Eugene steps in, causing the girl to leave. But noticing this, Eugene's oblivious father gets extremely angry at her for interrupting Théophile's love affair. A few days later, Théophile and Eugene are decorating the house for Christmas. When they go upstairs to search for ornaments, Eugene experiences another seizure. Some spirit creeps out of the corner and she freezes in fear. Her brother tries to comfort her. Eugene tells her brother she can see spirits. A young lady's spirit has been appearing to her for the past few days and seems she needs her help. But Eugene doesn't know how to help her. Eugene says that initially she felt like a freak, but she began to feel more normal after reading the book the young man lent her. Hearing this, Théophile is worried because society often treats girls like Eugene unfairly. He knows it's hard to hide such conditions for long. It's just a matter of time when the family takes matters into their own hands to take action. One night, while Eugene is brushing her grandmother's hair, she has yet another episode in a possessed state. She instinctively starts searching through her grandmother's dresser, eventually finding a long-lost necklace of her grandmother stuck upside the drawer, a gift from her late husband that's been missing for 40 years. In a mix of joy and confusion, her grandmother asks how she knew the necklace was there. Eugene explains her late grandfather told her. Grandma hugs Eugene, appreciating her. Next morning, Eugene's mother wakes her up, and with tears in her eyes, informs her that her father has planned an outing for them. Eugene starts preparing happily, and later joins her father and brother in a carriage. For noticing her father's travel bag, Eugene realizes that something's wrong. In the meanwhile, as she looks out, she's horrified to see a mental asylum. Eugene pleads desperately with her father and brother, insisting she's not insane. But they refuse to listen, and she is forcibly taken by the hospital security. In the meantime, Théophile starts to vomit as he's now ashamed of bringing his sister to this place. Inside the facility, the head nurse Genevieve examines Eugene and strictly warns her that any disobedience will lead to solitary confinement. Eugene is then led to her bedroom, where she's taken aback by the scene. There are dozens of women, half of them trying to touch her inappropriately. Then, a girl named Louise comes to Eugene's rescue and pushes the insane away. Louise appears to be the sanest among them all, with least weird behavior. She tells Eugene that she's engaged to one of the doctors at the mental facility and they plan to marry soon. The Eugene could not sleep at night, as asylum nights are full of nightmares and painful wails of the women. Next morning, she watches Genevieve taking Louise somewhere. Louise is brought into a hall, with many doctors including her lover Dr. Jules, who smiles at her. The head Dr. Charcot conducts a hypnosis session on Louise using a tuning fork and instructs her to touch herself. The doctors don't know that Louise suffered a trauma from her uncle and is wrongly blamed for it by her aunt, which led to her confinement in asylum. This session triggers a memory, sending Louise into spasms, resulting in an epileptic attack. Later, while back in the room, Genevieve consoles Louise, telling her she did extremely well. Afterwards, Dr. Jules enters the room. He sends all the other staff away. He acts concerned for Louise, but in reality, he's a pervert who takes advantage of the patient's situation. He deceptively promised to marry Louise once she gets better, so the poor woman lets him pleasure himself. One day, Eugene tells Genevieve about a message from her deceased sister. Skeptical Genevieve doesn't believe her. To prove herself, Eugene reveals detailed facts about Genevieve, which no one knows, such as the letter she writes to her sister and the color of her sister's hair, etc. Genevieve is shocked on these details, but she still refuses to believe Eugene and leaves. The next day, it's finally Eugene's turn to be examined by Dr. Charcot. She stands her ground, insisting that she can see spirits and she's not mentally ill. However, Dr. Charcot dismisses her beliefs and claims she has hysteria and prescribes her hydrotherapy. Frustrated, Eugene angrily raises her voice at the nurse, making her situation even worse. Then she goes through the cruel practice of hydrotherapy, where patients are placed in a box filled with ice for extended hours until their bodies go numb and they no longer feel anything. Unfortunately, many women have lost their lives due to this brutal practice, but the doctors still believe it's the best way to silence them. Initially, Eugene refuses to cooperate, but eventually they place her in the icy box forcefully. The poor girl shivers and pleads for a while, before ultimately giving up and accepting her fate. That night, while Genevieve is on her way home, she feels as if someone's following her. To her surprise, it's Phil, who approaches her, requesting her to give Eugene the book about spirits that she's been reading before being sent here. He feels guilty for giving up on his sister and thinks this is the least he can do for her. Curious about the book, Genevieve ends up reading it the entire night. The next day, while still shaken by the book about spirits, Genevieve approaches Eugene and proposes a bargain that in exchange for the book and a means to connect her with Phil, she wants to speak to her deceased sister. However, the book is not enough for Eugene. She wants freedom, which is pretty much impossible. Anyhow, Genevieve agrees to persuade Dr. Charcot. That night, Genevieve wakes up Eugene and takes her to office, hoping to talk with her deceased sister. Initially, Eugene struggles to make contact, but ultimately, she is successful. Genevieve's sister reaches out and informs Genevieve that their father has fallen ill in the kitchen. Genevieve immediately rushes home and finds her father ill. When asked about how she knew about his illness, Genevieve confesses that she spoke with her deceased sister through a girl at the asylum. To her dismay, her father scolds her and accuses her of having gone insane, like her patients. One afternoon, Eugene watches a patient driven to madness due to overdose dose of medication. And shockingly, the doctors show no remorse. They even make cruel jokes about her suffering. Enraged, Eugene confronts the doctors, accusing them of using vulnerable women as their lab rats for their absurd medical experiments. She then threatens to expose their cruel practices and unethical conduct as she gets out of the place. Resultantly, they sedate Eugene and place her in isolation for a month to prevent her from influencing other women. Dr. Charcot assigns a particularly cruel nurse named Jean to closely monitor Eugene. She receives her meals through a small gap under the door. Windows in the room are only opened occasionally. Now it becomes clear that this so-called therapy is designed to break the patient's will. And as expected, as some pass, Eugene is slowly driven to the brink of insanity. One day, Jean enters Eugene's isolation cell to deliver her meal and tries to have a conversation. Eugene remains silent until she senses the presence of Jean's deceased mother in the room. It turns out that Jean had placed her own mother in the asylum, who died here. But none of this seems to trouble Jean until Eugene talks about her son, who was killed by Jean's mother. Hearing this, she breaks down in tears and clings to Eugene, crying on her shoulder. However, soon she grabs Eugene's hair and threatens her to never utter a word about her son again, and then storms out of Eugene's cell. In anger, she ends up colliding with one of the patients. She dismisses her as a crazy person, acting crazy, unaware that the woman was sent by Genevieve to steal the keys to the isolation room. With the keys in hand, Genevieve visits Eugene and communicates with her sister's spirit. Eugene conveys her sisters a message that she wants Genevieve to stop writing letters because they make her sad. Instead, she wants her to find happiness, live her life, and move on. Later that day, Genevieve informs Dr. Charcot that Eugene has shown remarkable improvement since being moved to isolation. Though he seems somewhat skeptical, but grants permission for Eugene to rejoin the common ward. Coming out of the dark isolation room, Eugene hugs Louise, who's now wheelchair-bound, because due to the brutal experiment she's injured. Days pass, and the asylum hosts its annual ball, a rare occasion where the women are allowed to dress up, dance, and briefly experience a normal life. Theophile also receives an invitation and joins the event to meet Eugene. The siblings are happy to see each other. They begin to dance along with the crowd. Meanwhile, Jean keeps a watchful eye on them. However, as she gets distracted momentarily, Eugene and her brother seize the opportunity to dance their way out of the moving crowd. Then they sneak into a room where Genevieve is waiting for them. Back at the ball, party quickly transforms into a madhouse. The savagery knows no bounds because the doctors get heavily drunk and begin taking advantage of patients who have no idea what's going on. The devil takes of drunk Dr. Jewel, who takes paralyzed Louise to an isolated room and forces himself onto her. On the other side, as Jean comes closer to fleeing siblings, some unknown asylum patient swiftly distracts her, allowing Eugene and Theophile to escape. Chaos ensues inside the hospital, as Dr. Jewel is attacked by some asylum patient who saw him taking advantage of Louise. Meanwhile, Genevieve is guiding the siblings out of the hospital. As they get out, Genevieve locks the gate and decides to stay behind. Eugene asks her to join them, but she refuses, stating that she's now free, in the sense that she no longer blames herself for her younger sister's death. Just then, Jean also arrives with security. Eugene and her brother have already left. Genevieve's conduct is deemed rebellious, and she's declared mentally becoming yet another victim of the asylum. Sadly, her father also doesn't intervene, as he believes that being surrounded by insane women, Genevieve also turned into one of them. A few months later, Eugene is living on the coast of France, far away from the brutality she once faced. For the first time in her life, she's really happy and free. She regularly writes letters to Genevieve, assuring her that her sister is always with her, offering protection and comfort. However, Eugene feels bad, for the person who helped her is now confined in the asylum. But Genevieve writes her back saying that even though she's physically in the asylum, her spirit is free, especially after knowing that her late sister is in a better place. And the movie ends. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button to help us out. Until next time, take care.